One of the primary drivers for triggering the EU referendum is immigration, and more specifically EU immigration that many deem to be out of control as a consequence of membership of the European Union, which means free movement of workers, which has prevented the UK from controlling its borders now for well over a decade, as the UK is buffeted by waves of ever escalating migrant flows from Europe each year, all adding to those that came before, with total immigration from the EU since 2000 now having passed the 5 million mark, all whilst both Labour and the Conservative government's promises to bring immigration under control have amounted to nothing, as the government has no control over EU migration, which thus continues on an accelerating trend trajectory. Therefore, voting to remain within the EU ensures EU migration will continue to increase, putting added pressure each year on housing, jobs, social services such as schools, the NHS and the benefit system, virtually all of which are already at critical breaking point levels, whilst the Remain in the EU camp tends to highlight the positive aspects of EU migration, such as it allows approximately 1.2 million Brits to live and work and study within the EU, with a million more tourists visiting each year, and that the UK is not part of the Schengen free movement area, and that warns that even if the UK left the EU, would still likely have to accept free movement of workers as a condition for gaining full access to the single market. Therefore, this analysis takes a detailed look at immigration to determine exactly what has transpired to date and where immigration is likely to trend towards over the coming years. To best understand whether Britain is experiencing an immigration crisis, one needs to look at what the levels of immigration were before Tony Blair's Labour government came into power in 1997. That soon opened up Britain's borders to migration from across the world and European Union, under the assumption that newly arrived migrants would tend to be more likely to vote Labour, the traditional political party for immigrants, and thus improve Labour's election prospects. The key indicator to focus upon is net migration, i.e. the grey bars that show the difference between those emigrating and those immigrating into the UK, is the fact that between 1970 and 1983 the UK experienced net emigration, i.e. more people left the UK than arrived for settlement. The immigration facts of 1970 to 1983 are that on average 38,000 more people emigrated from the UK than immigrated into the UK, whilst average annual immigration was 188k, which was against annual emigration of 227k, mostly Brits emigrating to the likes of Australia, Canada and the United States. Therefore, the UK clearly did not have an immigration problem during this period. Instead, the UK could be said to have had an emigration problem, i.e. a brain drain as a consequence of high taxes and socialism, such as the heavily subsidised dying industries such as steel, coal and autos, etc. For the next 14 years up to Labour taking power in 1997, average annual immigration was 269k against average annual emigration of 234k, resulting in an average net migration figure of plus 34k. Therefore, during the period up to Labour taking power in 1997, the UK did not have an immigration crisis or problem, with average net immigration at well below 50k per annum, and with the last figure of 48k for the year Labour took office. Whilst the Labour years soon saw net migration bust above 100k per annum, and then as free movement was opened up to Eastern Europe, immigration leapt by another 100k per annum, averaging during the mid-2000s at 213k per annum, and only starting to dip after Labour left office in 2010. When David Cameron came to power in 2010, he promised that he would cut net immigration by 2015 to the tens of thousands from the then disastrous annual figure of 205k, i.e. he stated overall net immigration will be kept in the tens of thousands rather than the current rate of hundreds of thousands. For the next 2 years of the coalition government, it appeared that the government was on target to achieve its election pledge to some extent. However, the trend soon sharply reversed as another lot of impoverished poor Eastern European states joined the EU, such as Romania, Bulgaria, Czech and Slovakia, were allowed free movement for work and benefits in the UK that sent immigration soaring into the stratosphere, setting a new high of 323k for 2015. So since 1998, UK net migration has been running at an average rate of plus 206k per annum against an average of plus 34k per annum during the previous period, i.e. 1984 to 97, or at 6 times the previous rate. However, the latest data in this series of a net 323k, near 9 times the preceding average, is an harbinger of a crisis that is literally exploding higher. The total net migration figures further illustrate that the last 18 years have seen an unprecedented and literally out of control immigration that resulted in a net 3.7 million migrants out of a total of 9.8 million taking up residency in the UK, which compares against just 308k during the preceding 18 years, i.e. 1980 to 97, or at 10 times the previous rate. So has Britain had an immigration crisis during the past 18 years or so? The answer most definitely is yes. And what's worse is that the last figure in this series for 2015 is showing net migration accelerating to a new extreme level of 323k, which implies that if urgent action is not taken, then the UK could look forward to far higher net migration over the next decade, i.e. to at least double the average rate of the past 18 years of 206k. My next video in this series takes a detailed look at the latest ONS statistics as they break down for EU and non-EU immigration. So click through to that, as well as the earlier video on why this referendum boils down into being one of the British people versus the establishment elite. And also subscribe to be notified of new videos in this series.